Hello, beautiful soul. Welcome to my YouTube channel or my podcast. I'm your host and guide, Will Caminada, and I'm here to help you awaken, heal, and expand your consciousness. Today, I'm bringing you a conversation episode, and I had the pleasure to talk to Jen Haddix, also known as the Selflove Yogi, and you'll find out why in this episode. Jen is a 200-hour certified yoga teacher and a self-love coach, focusing on soul connection and breaking the matrix. In this conversation, we talked about her spiritual awakening and healing journey, how we numb ourselves without even realizing, and how to overcome addictions and transform pain into power. We also talked about the power of forgiveness, gratitude, and what self-love really looks like. And also how yoga is not just a physical exercise, but it can also be a very powerful healing modality and spiritual practice. I hope that you enjoy the show, and if you do, please hit the subscribe button, leave a comment or a review, and share this episode with your friends. Enjoy the show. Hi, Jen. Thank you so much for being here on the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
It's such a pleasure. I love talking to you. I've been to your podcast a couple of times and we had great conversations. Usually they're very fun and light, but at the same time deep. So that's how we roll for anyone listening and watching. I would love to start, and that's something that I always ask my guests. I think it's very inspiring when we share our own spiritual awakening journey. And from your bio and your website, you talk about your childhood, that it was very traumatic, and that led you to years of binge drinking, low self-esteem, self-hate, bipolar disorder, numbing your emotions and running from your inner guidance. Been there, resonate, relate to the story. So I'd love for you to share your spiritual awakening journey, and how did you, I know it could be a long answer, but how did you go from that place to not wanting to be in your body, not wanting to be here, to now where you love yourself and you're empowering other people to love themselves?
Absolutely. And I'll try to condense it as best I can, because of course the childhood trauma, that's a whole, that could be an entire podcast if I wanted it to be. But something that I've learned over this journey is to let that be there for reference, but not to allow it to define who I am anymore. And so for many years, all the things that happened to me as a kid were like my backdrop for, well, this is why I'm this way. And I would just use it like in that victim mentality, which I actually just made a podcast episode about yesterday. And we all do that. We have things that happen to us. And then we're like, well, because this happened to me, this is why I am this way. And then we behave from that place. And I had just been doing it for so long. And I got to that point where I was diagnosed bipolar because I was just really struggling, and I was super suicidal, and I was drinking all the time. And a teacher walked into my life. And that's what I've been telling a lot of my clients and the people that I'm helping, is that you really are not meant to go it alone. And if somebody can come in and inspire you and sort of show you the way and light it up for you, then it's a lot easier than trying to do it by yourself. I mean, sure, all the information's out there on Google, but I had a teacher, my homeopath, who is still in my life today. And she basically acts like my second mom, since my mom is not here on this earth anymore. And she came into my life right when I was at my worst. And I think that is just kind of what sparked the spiritual awakening. I've always had an interest in it. I've always been very spiritually minded. And it was in there, it was click-clacking around in my head, but I just think that I was too focused on numbing pain to actually access it. So then when I always like to say, I just really got tired of my own bullshit. I was just really tired of being who I was. And it was just enough to make me go, okay, what do I need to do? And those next few years were very messy, a lot of crying, a lot of messing up, a lot of stress, a lot of purging. You're basically purging who you were, who you think you were, to get to the root of who you actually are. And I'm still doing that. Like last year, I went through a lot of things that I don't feel were for my highest self. And that was just more purging. Even though I do this work with other people, I still find corners of myself that are not serving the highest good, and they're just given to me by wherever, wherever.
And that's what makes you relatable as well, right? And that's what makes people want to work with you, right?
I hope so.
Yeah. And I want to touch on something you said about having that victim mentality and thinking that things have happened to you, right? There's a gap, right? To go from that place of things have happened to me to things are happening for me, right?
Exactly.
And I personally think it's important to stay in that void a little bit, even when you're aware of the spiritual realm, even when you're loving yourself. I think it's the first place we go to when something happens to us, something that we perceive as bad happens to us, is why is this happening to me, right?
Mm-hmm.
How did you go from that place and gained the awareness of, all right, everything that has happened in my life, they have happened for me, and I'm going to work on accepting them and heal?
That is one of the most powerful shifts we can make, right? Is changing from things are happening to me and to things are happening for me. But you're right, that gap in between there's that void there. And it can be hard to bridge that gap, and it can be hard to do that. So I think it's been years now too, since I started doing that work. But I really think the biggest thing that I did was I started paying attention to my thoughts. And I realized how, a lot of us, when we're not really ready for the spiritual awakening, we don't notice our thoughts very much. But when you start awakening, you really start to pay attention to them. And so I started to notice how negative my thoughts were, how victimized my thoughts were. And my teacher, my homeopath, she would always, I think it's Joe Dispenza who says this, but you put like a little hairband on your wrist, and every time you think a negative thought, you just snap yourself a little and say change, just to kind of get yourself in the habit of practicing new thought patterns. And I think that that's really where it started for me, is I just started to notice how negative I was really being. And I like to tell my clients now, do it from a place of forgiveness and self-love. But I know when you're in it, it's not always that easy. So if you are starting a journey like this, it's going to be like a messy process to see those thoughts that aren't serving you, because once you're aware, then it's more frustrating to notice them. But I really think that it began with me noticing and consciously changing them. And it was a practice that I did every single day.
Yeah.
All day, every day.
Yeah. Because I think when you're expanding your awareness, then you're literally hearing your thoughts louder and louder, right?
Yeah. Yes. And so then once you're expanding and you're starting to try to become a higher version of yourself, those low vibration thoughts will start to frustrate you. And I have a client right now who gets very frustrated with herself often. And I'm like, you just have to know that is from a previous version of yourself that has created those thoughts. And you just have to slowly disseminate them and reform them. And it takes a while. It can take some time to do that.
Yeah. And it takes forgiveness, I feel, too, right?
Yes.
Because
that is something we're not good at.
Yeah. Yeah. We tend to be harsh on ourselves. And I think forgiveness is a really key aspect. I mean, everything we're talking, I loved what you said. It's a continuous journey. It's not like we're awakened and then, hey, graduated. But it's a continuous journey, a continuous awakening, continuous healing. And the more you expand, the more you see the shadows, the more you see your thoughts, right? How do you think, if there's anyone watching or listening and feeling like they're going through this process of becoming more aware, but at the same time, not having that sort of forgiveness or that self-love or unconditional compassion, what would you tell them? How can they navigate through this phase?
Well, I think a powerful thing that you said was the shadows. And I like to talk about that a lot, like shadow self, shadow work. And I like to point out that our society is not built for shadow work. Our society has been constructed to keep us distracted from shadows. And so it is much more painful when you do finally start to look at them. So I like to encourage anyone listening, anyone going through this, please know that you're not alone. Because I think sometimes when you start to see those shadow selves, you're like, oh my God, like that's horrible. I wonder if anybody else experiences this. You feel very alone. You feel like you're the only one who possibly has those shadows, but it's not true. We all have them. It's just that we don't look at them very often. And so one of my favorite tools, which you might talk about on your podcast and YouTube channel sometimes, I don't know, I haven't seen you talk about it, but oponopono, are you familiar?
Yes.
So the oponopono prayer is one that I use a lot, and it is a forgiveness prayer. I always get the order wrong, especially if I'm on the podcast. I'm just going to be forgetful about it, but it's I'm sorry, thank you, I love you, please forgive me. And you say those things. My one of my coaches told me to say it 3 times in a row, 3 times a day. So if you've got something that's really, really stuck in your vibrational craw and you're just like, I can't get rid of this, I can't forgive myself, we can share that in the show notes, maybe a link, or I've got a graphic of it I can share with you. And it's a really powerful way to just kind of get yourself into that place of forgiveness. And we work on giving forgiveness to others, but we often forget to give that same forgiveness to ourselves and our past, the things that we've done, which I've got plenty of things that I've done in the past I'm not proud of.
Yeah, I find that it's harder to forgive ourselves, at least for me. And I see that's a common thing amongst people. And I think maybe it's the first step is to really forgive others. But when we start looking at everyone and everything as a reflection of yourself, then you understand that it all starts within. It's like, I can forgive others, but if I can't forgive myself, then it's just half of the forgiveness, right?
Yeah.
And the same goes for love. I think that if we don't love ourselves, if we don't like fill our cups, we can't pour that love. We can't love others unconditionally. Yeah. And so I want to link to the self-love aspects because you're also known as the self-love yogi. So let's talk first about the self-love bit. Why self-love? Why is this your brand? What's the role of self-love in that journey, in your journey?
Well, it's one of those things, right? Like we hear it a lot. It's a very big buzzword, especially in this personal development community, but I think not a lot of people really realize what it is. And so I've been talking a lot lately about how like bubble baths and those sorts of self-care things are tools to get you closer to self-love, but they're not what self-love is. Like you said, if you look at the world as a mirror of yourself and you are trying to love others, like how do I want to say this? You teach others how to treat you, and you also put out that vibration that is mirrored back to you. So if it is coming from a place of self-hatred, that's all you're going to see in the world, and it's going to compact upon itself. And so if you're coming from a negative place, which I was, my world, you're always stuck in traffic, you're always almost hitting somebody, you're always frustrated, things are always going wrong. And the reason for that is that lack of connection and that lack of love of self, because you're projecting out how you feel about yourself, and then it's being mirrored back to you. So the reason I think it's so important is exactly what you said. Like it's that coming from a place of self-love to be able to see the world in a different way. And I think that also if you are healing trauma, but you're mad at yourself for it, or you're hating yourself because of these things that happened, or you're blaming yourself, all of that is completely counterproductive to the healing journey. And so something I've been working with lately is I truly think, and this is something that was inspired by Aaron Abke, because he was kind of harping on the self-love catchphrase, is I really think self-love is source love, because we are source. And so I think the way that I look at self-love is more or less, yes, you're loving yourself, but it's more to me peeling back the layers that hide who you really are. Because if you knew who you really were, it would be easy to love yourself because you're source. But all of those veils, all of that matrix bullshit is over us. And so we don't love ourselves because we see all the crap. And so what I like to work on is getting rid of all those layers and getting to the root of who we really are. And then self-love is easy.
Yeah, I really love that, because it's less about going forward and getting to a destination. It's not about that. It's about peeling off the layers and sort of remembering who we truly are. Right? The source, the love, the light. I love that. And Was there a moment in your life that you just went, oh my God, self-love. I need to love myself. Was it like
I
that, or was it more a gradual thing?
gradual, I think, because it's there's a lot of areas in my life where I've behaved in a way that does not seem conducive to self-love. So like I, had lots of eating disorders. I've been really horrible to my body. I used to sleep around a lot. Like I've done a lot of things that are just not in connection with source. And you'd think they would make you feel better in the moment, and then you do it, and then you're like, you feel crappy afterward. And I had so many of those specifically with men. I don't want to get too TMI on your podcast, but specifically just kind of a very promiscuous thing that I had going on, which comes from my childhood. And it was like a satisfaction in the moment, but then feeling absolutely horrible about yourself afterward. And I had so many of those that I was like, oh, something is off here. Like something is not feeling right. And I think that started to kind of enlighten me to that part. But then there's so many different parts of me that have been veiled and have been they're not showing the truth. And so I think I just had so many of those different experiences in my eating disorders with men, with all the things that I was doing, that just happened enough where I was like, okay, like this
Yeah.
feels like crap. Something needs to change. And I think it was just a cumulative thing.
Do you think those things were sort of like numbing buttons?
100%. And those are like my numbing buttons, right? So I've got areas in my life where I excel and I do really, really well. I've always done really well in business. I've always done really well at work. But when it came to like men or my body issues, those were my things that I could use and manipulate in order
Yeah.
to continue to numb myself. So like anybody on who's listening, who's ever had an eating disorder knows, like you can use that as a control. And when things in your life feel out of control, you can use that as a way to try to control the
Yeah.
chaos. And so that's one of many
Yeah.
neurotic
Yeah.
things I was doing.
No, I relate to that. And I actually talk about the numbing buttons in my book. In the first chapter, it's all about self-love and how I didn't think I was good enough. I didn't accept myself. So I was using those, drinking, those things. Sometimes it's very subtle. You think it's something that, for me at least, it was work too. I thought it was a good thing, but that was a numbing button as well, because I was a workaholic. It's just like we try to find ways to escape being with us, right? Because it's just unbearable to be with
Yeah.
us. But when you're in it, sometimes we don't really notice that there are actually numbing buttons.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think people can gain some awareness as to whether or not they're using numbing buttons or using things as a way to avoid being with themselves?
I usually like to start with like journaling exercises and basically getting real with yourself. So if you're listening to this and you're kind of like, okay, like I've been thinking about this for a while, and I know there's things that like I might be doing that aren't serving my highest good, I'm not really sure where to start. Like I usually recommend a meditation and sitting with it and just kind of letting things pop up for you, and also not allowing yourself to get overwhelmed, because there might be quite a few things that pop up where you're like, wow, I've got 10 or 15 numbing buttons that are not serving me. I'm not going to stop them all at once. I mean, we're human, and we've gotten into this matrix of numbing buttons. And so it's like, it's going to take you a while. And that's where the forgiveness and the self-love comes in. But I usually start with awareness and just noticing them, and then maybe just tackle the easiest one first. And go, if you're a big drinker, like I was, like drinking wasn't going to go away for a while because it was something I was doing a lot of, and it was something that I didn't realize I relied on. So I'd want to start with something smaller, like caffeine. I don't know, something, one of my other things that I would do. And so save the bigger ones for last, in my opinion, just because that way you don't derail yourself before you've even started. And you can give yourself those baby steps and those little celebratory moments so that you feel good about yourself and you continue, rather than trying to bite off the whole thing at once and then feeling worse about yourself, which becomes a shame spiral, which leads you more into the buttons. That's
Yeah.
kind of the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, because sometimes we just want to take everything. It's like, especially when you go through the awakening and you see things from a broader perspective, you want to change everything, like you want to go to the gym, you want to become vegan, you want to
All of
meditate
it.
an hour every day, right?
Yep.
But I think it's so much more effective if you just start slowly, like you said, start meditating or journaling, see what works for you. And I think there's a lot of power in changing the habits as well. As you mentioned, the thoughts, and being aware of the thoughts is really, really good, but also we need to change the habit, right? Because I might be aware that, maybe sugar is one of the things that I'm using to numb myself, but then I have to find that willingness within me to change the habit.
Yeah. So
And
that's
I
one of my
think,
favorite things actually I like to talk about is aligned action. So if you do start just kind of being honest with yourself in a loving way, those actions to stop doing those things are going to come easier. So if you're doing it from a place of resistance and you're like, I feel like shit about myself, I'm such a piece of crap, I need to stop doing this. And like, that's very common. Like when I was a personal trainer, that came up a lot. People are like, well, I just hate myself, so I need to work out, or I just hate my belly, so I need to do this. And I'm like, well, you're not coming from a place of love. So it's going to be harder for you to do that action. And over time, you're going to resent it. You're not going to feel good about it. But if you can kind of reframe the words that you're saying about yourself, which starts in the thoughts, right? So you kind of start there and go, okay, well, I'm thinking these negative things about myself. So can I slowly start to change that? That will eventually lead into aligned action. And it will, like, for example, I quit drinking on January 9th. And I had already been playing around with the idea of sober curiosity. And I knew it wasn't serving me. And I would go out with friends and just not drink and see how it felt. And it was kind of like, but I'd been talking to Source about it for a while. And I'd been thinking about it for a while. And it took me maybe 9 months to really think about it. I didn't quit. I just thought about it. And then I woke up one day on January 9th and I was like, oh, I got like a download that said no more drinking. And I was like, okay. And I haven't drank since, and it hasn't been hard. And I've tried in the past out of self-hatred, and I always ended up drinking again 2 weeks later. So that's where I see that shift is if you do it from a place of self-hatred or frustration with yourself, you're setting yourself up for failure. But aligned action is a much different thing.
yes, absolutely. And that's the self-love practice, right? It's not something that you just get a badge and says, I love myself. It's like a continuous work, and it keeps getting, I don't want to say harder, but the tests keep showing up, right? Because we're still living, we're gonna have bad thoughts, we're gonna have negative thoughts, we're gonna have challenges, especially when the relationship factor comes in your life too, because we're all relating to each other in this world. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that. I know for myself, in my self-love journey, for a long time, I lived with self-hatred for being gay. I was in the closet, and it was a process to come out to my mom. But when I did, and she said, I love you unconditionally, and it was very healing for me. But I actually think that the big boss was my brother, because he's older. He's like the typical straight Brazilian guy who likes beer and football and soccer and women. And it was just, I think for me, it was just hard to tell him, because in my mind, I thought he's just going to hate me. He's not going to be proud of me. And he would always say, I'm so proud of you, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, I think that for me, when I look back, he was the teacher, like him, just by being him, he was the teacher. Because when I finally mustered up the courage to tell him, everything was fine. But for me, it was like a pivotal moment in my life that I went, okay, big boss done.
What changed for you when that happened? Like what shifted?
Well, it shifted that I think we fear so much that we're not going to be loved. But for me, I had to get to a point where I was fine if he said, I'm not proud of you, I don't love you, whatever, because these things go through our minds, right? And so I had to be okay if that happened. So for me to get to that place, it took a while. But all of that to say that, when it comes to relationships, I think that we have those teachers in our lives that show up for a reason. You know, they can be your ex, you know, they can be, usually it is, and parents as well. So I would like to know, for you, was there one of those, I don't know, disguised teachers that really helped you find that self-love?
Well, and so that's touching on a really big pain point for me, because relationships are one of my bigger pain points, friendships and relationships, because even platonic friendships, I tend to give a lot of energy, and people kind of energy vampire me until I started to get some more boundaries. But I had a guy a couple of years ago that I was dating that was a really toxic alcoholic, and it was a really, really messy situation that ended really horribly. And it led me on like a year or two of more promiscuity and more of that numbing and numbing buttons and more of that behavior, when I had thought that I was done with it too. So this is like into my awakening. I've been doing really, really well. I'm already a yoga teacher. I'm already starting this business, and I still am having that pain button pushed and using those same numbing buttons after the fact. So all that happened. But then actually, like a few weeks ago, we haven't talked at all because it ended really horribly. He got my family involved and he was doing some toxic stuff. I wrote him an email and I just said, you know, because I just met my person, and I'd never thought that I would meet my person. I didn't think that was a thing for me, because I've always just been kind of this unhealed person that I don't feel deserving of love in that way. Mm-hmm. And recently I found my person, and I've been really discovering a lot of things about myself through this person. He's clearly in my life for a reason. And I felt inspired to reach out to this ex and just thank him for all of the things that he taught me during that toxic relationship, and how it helped lead me to somebody who is much more aligned with what it is that I need to learn. Mm-hmm. And so I had a person like that. I've had several people like that. But I think now that I'm awake, I was able to use it, because I think I've probably had lessons in the past, but I wasn't awakened yet. So they were just kind of coming and going. And so for a long time, I asked myself, like, why did that happen to me? Why did I choose that? Why on earth would I allow a human like that into my life, who was going to come in and bulldoze everything? But finally, last month, I was like, oh, okay. Like that, it all kind of tied together and made sense. And so you said something really powerful about how, like, when you told your brother you had to be okay with whatever his answer was. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, and any of the clients or people that I work with, that's what I like to teach, is that these outside relationships, like you said, are usually a mirror of yourself. So if you're attracting the same experiences over and over again, it's a mirror of something you're putting out, but also you don't have to give another person so much of your power. And we are taught to do that. We're taught to give all of our happiness to other people. And so then we get into these relationships that don't serve us, and they pull us even further away from our highest self, because we learn, oh, well, if in order to be happy, I have to have this, or I have to get married by this, or whatever it is that we think. And we put so much pressure on other people to be our everything when we can be our everything. Mm-hmm. And so that's a really big thing that I think I've realized.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. And I think the thing that was coming up as well for me is the closure aspect, because sometimes we expect to find closure in a relationship or something so that we can heal, but we can give ourselves that closure, right? And I relate to your story, because there has been a moment where when I reached out to somebody just to say, look, thank you. I had no expectations, no attachments to the outcome. This is my truth. And it felt good for me. It sounds a little bit selfish, but it feels good. That's self-love too. It's like when you're okay to find your closure, if you want to tell them that if that's going to make you feel like a closure, if that's going to make you feel better, then go and do it. Sometimes you don't have to do that. But I really love that you said that, because it might encourage people to first, I guess, work on this bond, right? And really heal that bond, so that you don't contact them with that energy of the attachment still.
Exactly. Which, to be fair, I did multiple times before that. So I emailed him plenty of times with, unhealed attachment shit that I was holding. But yeah, I think that you're right. Like hopefully it inspires somebody. And I also don't think it's selfish. And I think it's one of those things, like if the world is mirroring back to you what you're putting out, then nothing you do is really selfish, because you're just trying to create a better human experience and
Yeah.
you'll see better things. And so I just think that we think so many things are selfish when they're not.
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of people think that self-love is selfish, right?
And I'm like the most selfish person. I always have been. And I'm capitalizing on that right now. Like I've always been super independent. I do everything for me. I do my business. I do my thing. I like to live by like I like my stuff. And my dad, like my family's always said I was kind of selfish. I'm like, cool, good. Like I will be like I give back. I help people. I don't need, but if you can't help other people or do anything for anyone if you're not helping yourself first.
Yes, absolutely. And so in your on your healing journey, so what were some of the tools that you used to get to a point where you can talk to your acts and say thank you?
Um, a lot of it, like I do use meditation and a lot of yoga. Obviously, we'll get to the yoga part in a minute. I'm not as great at meditation. I was just talking to a friend about that yesterday. I'm not as consistent. And I think I need to be. I just learned that my human design is a projector. I don't know if you know your human design, but do
I
you know
don't,
yours?
I know of it, but I don't know my.
Oh, I'd be curious to know yours. But projectors, we're like 20% of the population and we give off a lot of our energy. And we also take on, we're like the ultimate empath. And so I need to be meditating more consistently for that. But yoga is a really big one for me. Exercise is a really big one for me. Just a big one is asking for help, because that was another one of my things is I'm like the opposite of a codependent. So because of my trauma, I'm like the kind of person who will push everyone away and do it on my own. And
Mhm.
I learned to reach out to resources that have things that I don't have that can help me. So that's where my original teacher that basically pulled me out of my suicidal dilemma is she's my homeopath, and I still reach out to her. I find people that are available to hold space for me, but I do know that can be hard if you're really feeling down and you're really struggling and you're not like quite ready to ask for help yet. I know that that's kind of a challenge, but I do recommend some kind of life coach or therapist or somebody who can hold space for you that's not going to judge you. Because a lot of us too, like when we're just beginning a healing journey, we have a lot of friends that are not on board with it. That happens to a lot of people where they've got people that are like, you're changing and I don't like it. And I like you better when you're this way. And
Yeah.
then you try to talk about your experiences with those people and they can't hear you from up here. So they try to bring you down to where they are, which is nothing wrong with their human experience. But if you're on a healing journey and you feel like no one can hear you, find somebody who can hear you. That really was one of my biggest things, is finding someone who could hold space for me without judging me.
Yes, it's
So,
really, really important. And the help factor as well.
yeah.
Because I think we've grown in a society that thinks you're weak if you're asking for help, right?
Yeah.
When in actuality, being vulnerable, asking for help is where the strength is, right?
Correct. Absolutely.
And so when did yoga show up for you? And what was the role of yoga in your healing journey?
So I've always been interested in yoga, but it's funny because I took a yoga class when I was like 23. I was living in Chicago for like a minute, and my friend's dad was a yoga teacher, and I took it and I was so bored. I was like, this is so boring. I hate this. And so I remember I didn't go back for a long time. And then I started bodybuilding. It was probably like 7 or 8 years ago. And there was an Ashtanga class at my gym. And I started taking it because Ashtanga was like the hard yoga. And I'm like, cool, I like to do hard stuff. So I was like doing the headstands and all that stuff. And I didn't go for anything other than exercise. But the coolest thing about yoga is that you don't even realize it's happening. You don't realize that just by moving with your breath, you are connecting things that have not been connected in a really long time. And so I started that. And then the bodybuilding thing that brought up a lot of my body issues. And I went through a whole long, like I rebounded really hard and gained a bunch of weight back and struggled and was, all my eating disorders were back on fire again. So I started going to yoga more regularly. And I don't know, I went there not even knowing why I was going. I don't think I realized I wanted the healing. I was just like, well, I just need to go to yoga because I feel better when I'm there. And so then I ended up doing my teacher training at the same place that I was taking class. And like many of us, are you trained in yoga or no?
No, I did a month of yoga, intensive yoga, but it wasn't a training, a tutor training
Oh,
course.
okay. But you did like a month of intent. That's awesome. But a lot of us are like, oh, I'm just going to go deep in my practice. Like a lot of us don't take teacher training to become teachers. We just
Hmm.
go because we want to learn more about it. So that's where I was at, as I was like, okay, well, I'm just going to do this to deepen my practice. And then my my graduating class was like 30 people. We had a really big group and they were all like, you need to teach. And I was like, oh, okay. And I didn't teach for like another couple of years. I opened a pet sitting company and I was doing something else. And then I moved to Reno, which is where home is. And I just emailed a studio and got the first job I even emailed for. And I feel like I'm in my element. Like it's something I've been looking for my entire life and I'm finally doing it. And I feel so connected when I teach. And
Mm.
there's always more to learn, but this is like my thing. Like this is absolutely my thing. And it feels so cool to actually be connected with the tool that really helps people. Cause like I was a personal trainer for a long time and I would try to do the self-love portion because I was just figuring it out then. And all they wanted me to do was tell them what to eat and what to do. And I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
but you need to love yourself in order to get there and this. And they were like, nah, I don't really want to hear that. I just want you to tell me what to do. And so I was in a place where I wanted to give this information out because I was learning it, but the people I was talking to didn't want what I had. So now that I'm in yoga, people actually want this. People are like looking for that connection. And so I feel like I'm connected and the people that are coming to me are connected. And
Yeah.
it's such a powerful tool. It is one of my favorite things to tell people to do if they're struggling in any way. Just get yourself on the mat.
Yeah.
And
And even if the people that come to you are not necessarily connected or quote unquote spiritual, they are open to something that they might not know what it is, like you before, and like me too. Because I
exactly.
started just like, okay, I'm just gonna exercise. And I wanted the harder one. Like I went to the gym and I tried all of them and I went for the dynamic yoga, which it's not even yoga, but it was the hardest one, because I thought this is gonna get me the strongest. But it's a beautiful journey if you just surrender to it, because then you start realizing that yoga is way more about the body, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it is, for me at least, a spiritual practice more than a physical body. Of course, the body and your shape is a consequence of the things that you're doing. Um, so what do you think? Do you think that yoga is more of a spiritual practice or physical practice for anybody who might be interested in starting yoga? Because I had those questions as well. I was like, why do I want to do yoga? Because there's an aspect that's kind of mainstream,
Hmm.
which is not necessarily bad, because what's mainstream could call you to something else that you don't know what it is.
Exactly.
But yeah, that at least that's what happened for me. So what do you think? Would you say that yoga is a spiritual practice?
100%. But I know that not everybody sees it that way. So that's the funny thing is that depending on who's listening to this and who you go to and who you talk to, like I applied for yoga jobs where I applied to this one place one time in Austin. And I told the lady I'm a little bit more of a spiritually minded teacher. And she's like, oh, no, I don't want that. I just want the movement. I don't want the spirituality. And some people feel that way. And so I think it is a spiritual practice because, and I cannot quote them, shame on me, bad yoga teacher, but there are 8 limbs of yoga and the movement, the asana of the practice is number 3. So that kind of
Mm.
tells you where the movement is in the process. Like the movement is just a tool to get to samadhi, which is the final limb, which is ascension into all the realms that you talk about. So it's the breath, the pranayama, the movement, the meditation, all of that are just tools to enlightenment. So for me, it is impossible to look at yoga as not a spiritual practice. But if you are new, you don't have to come in and be all woo woo. And depending on where you go, because like my yoga studio that I manage, we do chanting and we're a little bit more spiritual. We're not super duper spiritual. We do a lot of vinyasa and it's kind of exercise minded, but we chant. And some people that are new might be like, what are we doing? Like, what's happening? But if you can just surrender to it, don't worry about putting any religious labels on it. Or people do that a lot. They kind of come in, especially if they're like super religious. And then we're like, saying namaste or we're saying things to whatever God we understand. Some people don't like that it might not be for you if that's how you feel. Not that I'm judging you if you feel that way, but it really is. If you can go in with an open mind, it can be whatever you need it to be.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I like about it.
Yeah. And it's more than one thing, right? It's more than one style, because there are a
So
bunch
many.
of different lineages and styles. It's just like going to the gym. You don't have to lift weight. You can run, you can ride a bike, you can do a Zumba class, right?
The same
And
thing.
so I think it's important to, like you said, have an open mind and be curious and try different classes and find the one that resonates with you. But I do think that's sort of like the con of the mainstream yoga, which is some people, they just want the physical aspect of it. And I lived in LA and I've been to a few yoga classes, and it was just, I was just like, this is not a yoga. This is just like, I felt really tired afterwards. I felt really strong, but there was nothing, like no mindfulness, and I had come from a very like spiritual practice. I did my training in Thailand, and I
Oh, wow.
realized the power of yoga when it comes to the chakras as well. It's like, I think I felt my chakras for the first time when I did yoga.
Well, the
And
cool thing I just learned about yoga is it's sacred geometry. And I think you and I were talking about that. So the shapes, it's not just exercise, like they're built on purpose and they're ancient. It's yoga's been around forever. And
yeah,
so it's literally sacred geometry. So it's not just like bicep curls. It's like a
yeah,
totally different thing.
yeah, that's a result, right? Or a consequence.
Exactly.
Would you say that yoga is also a healing tool or healing modality?
100%. So that's like, so during my awakening journey and all that healing that I've done, I tell my students all the time, I have cried on my mat so many times. Like for whatever reason, you move things around because also you're moving energy. So if you've got anything that's stuck in you, like I tell people when we're in pigeon, I like to call it crying pigeon because you've got all this stuff in your hips. And when you
Mhm.
open them up, stuff comes out and you actually are releasing your own trauma, possibly generational trauma, um,
The group,
generational karma. What?
the group's trauma as well, the
The
group's
group's
energy.
trauma, the collective trauma, like I also have been telling my students a lot lately because of everything we're going on in the world. I'm like, just you coming into this room and showing up, that's how we heal the world. So there's a collective trauma that's going on right now. And you showing up for yourself and connecting is going to have you off of your mat being more connected. And when you do that, you mirror out into the world and it'll heal the world in that way. But
Mhm.
if you're not interested in, that's okay. Global healing. If you're more like, okay, well, how does it help me? Like it absolutely moves energy through you. It connects the chakras. It connects I love it so much. But I do want to talk a little bit about what you said about LA and just sort of mainstream, because if any of your listeners come to my page, they're going to see like I love to do headstands. I love to do arm balances. I do some crazy yoga poses because with all my body issues, one of the things that's always come up for me is like, okay, so I did dance when I was a kid or when I was like a teenager, and the ballet teacher was like, you are too fat to do ballet. So that's kind of like the dancer culture is very much like you want to be thin, you want to be a rail. And I just never have been. I'm a very like strong person. And so in yoga, that's a way for me to kind of like embrace my strength. And it's not about showing off. It's more about just kind of seeing where your limitations are and allowing the poses to help you transcend them. But you do not have to do any of that to get yoga. Like I also teach restorative. That is one of my favorite practices to do. You could lay down in Shavasana for an hour and meditate. That would be yoga. So you don't have to make the shapes. If you're a more like pitta, vata, like a lot of energy, it's good for you to move your body. And so it's helpful, but you just have to kind of play around and find the one that fits you and just try not to be deterred, because the other thing you've heard a lot too, I'm sure, is like, I'm not flexible. I can't go to yoga, but and you see those pictures and you're like, I can't do that, but you don't have to do that. Like, you don't have to. And there are a lot of yoga teachers on Instagram that are really good at showing like different bodies and different ways of accessing yoga. If you're a bigger body, a smaller body, like there's a lot of us are out here doing this work, trying to make it accessible to the people that need it. So there's going to be people like me that are maybe stronger and feel, uncomfortable with their size or something, but they find that they can access their strength in yoga. And that's something that makes them feel good about themselves. And that might be the avenue they take, or there's so many different entrances to this. Like,
Yeah. And it's a practice, right? It's called a practice for a reason.
exactly.
What I love about yoga is just it is a group thing, but it's a very individual thing as well. It means union, but it's also the union with you. So like you go as far as you can, as far as you want, but with practice, you can really change your body and change a lot of things inside of you. And I remember um, when I was doing my training, we were doing 4 hours of yoga every day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the afternoon.
Amazing.
And it was the kind of yoga that you hold the pose for a few minutes. It was a mixture of hatha, kundalini, vinyasa. But I remember that we were going through the chakras, and when we did the week of the heart chakra, everybody was focusing on the heart. Everybody was going through the poses. At the end, when there was a song, very emotional song being played, the whole group was crying. It was super powerful because we were really working on the heart. And so, like, if anything, you just have to see it for yourself, right? Like because we go through the experiences and we share them, but it's a very unique journey, I think. Of
Correct.
course, we have the guides, you're a teacher, you're a guide, and the experience is going to be unique.
I love that. And that's the thing, is like, you can explain that to your audience, but you won't know unless you try it yourself, and just go in with an open heart and an open mind and just see the kind of energy that you can feel from a practice like that. I cried a little when you said that, just hearing you talk about that. Like, that's because it's so powerful. It is, but it is very individual. And also just from a more third dimensional mindset, like, no one is watching you. That's, people get really anxious about that. They're like, I don't want to go to a class because I don't want people to think I look stupid. Everybody is having their own little individual experience on their mat. And if they are watching you, that's about them, not about you. So
Yeah.
just try to don't take that healing away from yourself because you're anxious or nervous about other people. Like, you're depriving yourself of something really powerful if you are letting that get in your way.
Yeah, this is so true. If they're watching, they're still on the gym mindset, right?
Exactly.
They're going to the gym, not the yoga mat.
And that happens. And you're going to find people like that in a yoga class. There's plenty of people that go in for gym like things. And even, for example, that's where I met my boyfriend, my person. He came into one of my classes and he was in a yin class, but he's a very athletic, very strong guy. And I was watching him and he was trying to do all this hard stuff in this yin class. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to have you come to my vinyasa class because clearly that's what you want. And he still likes to do the hardest stuff, but over the past few months, he's found the spirituality in it because he's open to it. And he's like, oh, I don't have to come in here and be a bro about it. Like, I can actually just do the movement and I can challenge myself, but it's not about just go a few times. You'll feel it. You'll know that, oh, this is not what I thought it was. It's not like a show off class. It's not a gym class. It's the only exercise, in my opinion, that connects at all three things. Maybe Tai Chi does that as well. I think I've never done Tai Chi, but I think it's a similar practice.
Like mind, body, and spirit.
Exactly.
And so if there's anyone watching or listening to this, not the ones, the yogi ones already, but those people that are thinking of starting yoga or they have tried before, what advice would you give them? How can they start their yoga journey?
Well, I feel like everybody likes it differently. So some people are class people. I recommend going to a few classes and trying a couple different ones and just being open-minded, because sometimes I've heard horror stories of somebody went to a class and the teacher just was not jiving with them and they don't want to go back because it wasn't a good experience. Sometimes teachers and students are just not good fits. Like a therapist, it's the same thing. You need to find the teacher that resonates with you. But now, we have so many online options, myself included. So like I said, I've got online yoga videos. I do donation-based classes, but then you might be able to find somebody who has a body that resonates with you, that moves in a way that resonates with you, that says things that feel good to you. There's so many of us yoga influencers on Instagram. Find one of us. We're all doing it, and try a few videos and just let yourself be open. That's the biggest thing, that forgiveness piece, that self-love piece, and just being open-minded, and just don't I tell my students all the time, just let go of your expectations. Like whatever you're expecting your body to do, don't worry about that. Just let it be whatever it is. And you might surprise yourself, but if you come in with this big expectation, like I'm going to keep up or I'm going to do all this stuff, and then you don't do that, then you don't want to go back. So it's like the ultimate self-love practice. And so I would say videos are a good way. You could even just try a couple of poses. Like if you want to find some pictures and then get yourself quiet and try a couple of them and just breathe. But if you're new, I do highly recommend finding a teacher of some kind so that you feel guided when you do it.
Yeah. I guess nowadays with the online world, that can help as well if you're afraid of, showing up in a group and feeling afraid of, I don't know, people watching you or whatever. You can just do it in the comfort of your home. Right.
Yeah. And so that's, and not that I'm trying to plug myself too much here, but just talk a little bit about what I do. And I know other people probably do this as well.
I actually want you to plug.
Oh, perfect. Okay, good. I guess we're at that time, huh? Because one of the scary parts, I think, for people is doing it at home. They're like, am I doing it right? Right. So there's that aspect. So it's like, if you go to a class, you think people are watching you. If you're at home, you don't know if you're doing it right. So I do encourage you to really listen to your body. But something that I offer is I do Zoom private sessions. And so you might be able to find somebody that you could maybe do one or two of those with, that can help you at least get your alignment so you feel good in it. And then you can do the practice on your own. Like you don't have to meet me every day, but you could meet me once a week or something for a little while you get a practice going. And, and
I think that's a really good point, especially if, like you say, if you're beginning, because you don't know whether you're doing it right or wrong. And so it works when you're doing online, but preferably one-on-one so that you can watch every muscle, every movement.
Exactly. So if you're like really new and because the other thing too, people come in with injuries, people come in with, things going on in their bodies where not everybody can do everything. And that's what I like about yoga, is that there's so many different ways to modify movement to make it work for you. Like I used to be the most annoying teacher because I was like a boot camp coach and I didn't have any injuries. And so I was like, just do it. And people would be like, no, I've got this thing. And I'm like, you're fine. Like I was the worst about it. And then I tore my ACL in half and I had to go through surgery and PT. And I'm like, oh, okay. So this is what people are coming in with. And things need to be changed for individual bodies. Like it's not a one size fits all thing. So if you can find somebody that you trust to help you with your form, if you're going to do it at home, that is something that I offer if you want to like check me out. But if you find another yoga teacher that resonates with you, check in with them and see like, hey, can you give me some advice? Can you help me out if you want to do it at home? But classes are good too. So it kind of just depends on what resonates with you.
Excellent. So how can people, I have a few questions, final questions. But just before I go into these questions, how can people connect with you and work with you? What's the best way to connect?
So I'm on my Instagram all the time, except for this 72-hour hiatus I'm on, but at the selflove.yogi. So I do a live video every Monday at the exact same time Will does a live video. So I do like card pulls on Mondays, and I do some donation-based classes on there, and I have all of my offerings on there. So it's a good way to like reach out to me, have it like, I love to hang out in my DMs and chat with people and kind of help them identify where they need a little bit of help. And then of course, if I've got a service for them, I can do that, but I can also give you gentle guidance. Like I'm not trying to, sell all the time. I'm here to help people. My website has everything. So www.selfloveyogi.com. I've got all of my freebies and courses and all my services. I've got some free yoga videos on there. So you could start there if you wanted. I've got a few free yoga videos. I've got some meditations on there. And so you can kind of see my style. And then I have a podcast as well. So the Selflove Yogi podcast, you can hear all my stuff on there too. So
yes, and I'll put the links in the description. Do you also have group classes, online classes?
I do that kind of sporadically. So I occasionally will do like a drop-in, like donation-based, like yin class, which usually goes pretty well. But I don't do like a regular schedule like that right now, just because it is really prone to burnout for me specifically. But I want to start doing, this is an idea that I just worked on, is I want to do new moon and full moon salutation. So there's something called a moon salutation. So it's not a sun salutation, but it's a moon salutation.
That's great.
And that would be like a twice a month thing where we could set intentions or release stuff and then do a yoga practice. And so that's something I'm working on right now.
Great idea. Best thing is to follow you on Instagram so that you're up to date.
Correct. Yeah, I will tell you about all of it on Instagram. I'm very annoying on Instagram.
Oh, you've got great content. I really highly recommend that you follow Jan. And I'll put the links in the description. So I have some final questions. I call them fun and deep questions.
Okay.
So I suggest that you don't overthink, just like answer what comes to your mind first. Some of them are hypothetical questions. So first one, what's your definition of self-love?
Source love, loving the real, I think, like loving the real you, not the you've been told to be.
Beautiful. Imagine that you could invite one non-famous person, dead or alive, to interview on your podcast. Who would you choose and why?
I know this is going to sound like cliche or silly, but it's always been Marilyn Monroe, because she has this beautiful vulnerability, and the relationship with her mother is kind of similar to some stuff I struggle with my mom. And I think that she was really misunderstood and a really beautiful human being that was completely like just blown up by the media in the wrong way. And so she's somebody I've always wanted to, I wish I could hear her story from her point of view.
Surprise. Did you watch Smash, the TV series?
Oh my God. Of course I did. I love
it.
Have you seen My Week with Marilyn?
No.
Oh, you should watch that. So that has Michelle Williams plays Marilyn Monroe, and it has Eddie Redmayne, who, if you've seen him in like Les Mis, he's got a beautiful voice. And it's just a really beautiful depiction of all of her pain. But Smash, I'm obsessed. I actually listen to that and sing it all the time.
I love the songs. I love Catherine McPhee.
Oh, she's so good. And then Megan Hilty is phenomenal. Like I can't, even with that whole cast. Yeah.
Yeah. So what's the name of the movie again?
My Week with Marilyn.
Okay. So
yeah,
here's a recommendation. And I know you like musicals too. So that was my next question.
Yay.
Imagine that all the musicals in the world were going to be deleted, destroyed forever. If you had to say only one musical, which one would you choose and why?
Why would you do that to me? One?
I usually do this with books, and people say the same thing. I can't choose a book.
You made me do musicals.
Yeah, because I know you like musicals. And
oh no. Ooh, that's hard. Like, oh God. One of my most favorites is Jekyll and Hyde. Have you ever seen that musical?
Yes.
Music is gorgeous. I cannot pick one, but because that's the one on the top of my head, and I don't want to make you watch me while I try to decide.
No, but usually that's why I say just pick the first
top of your head. So Jekyll and Hyde that's just close to my heart. One of my favorites that I loved to perform when I was in high school, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, and the story as well. I think there's a deep meaning.
Yes.
You know, the light and darkness. I don't know. I see everything from that kind of perspective.
Right. You can't not now, like you're awake. So everything is kind of,
yeah.
But it's beautiful. And the music is just In His Eyes is one of my, that song. I can't. So yeah, I love that musical.
Beautiful. So what is the one thing that people would be surprised to know about you?
I don't want to get into it but this is off the top of my head. Everybody is always surprised about my political leanings. That tends to be the biggest thing that people are always like, what? Because they label me as one thing. And I am a much more libertarian person, but people are usually surprised to find that I like have guns and that sort of thing, because I'm like this yogi, but I also am kind of a prepper. So I got a little bit of that going on within me.
A little bit of Jekyll and Hyde.
Hopefully it's that TMI on your podcast. Like I had Evan on here and we could like talk about stuff, but I don't want to like make anyone uncomfortable.
I'm just joking. But I think it's actually important that you mention this, because people, and I think that's why I have this question, because people might assume that just because you're a spiritual teacher, you don't like rap, an example.
Exactly. And well, people have these ideas about like yoga teachers. They think that you're just a certain thing, and I'm a lot of different things.
Yeah. So. Yeah. And I think you can be political and spiritual, right?
Mm-hmm. But I've had to let a lot of it go I've learned to, the closer I get to source love and self-love, the more that political stuff goes out the window. And I've been able to connect more.
Yeah,
with
I think it's
myself.
also because we start the process of detaching ourselves from any sort of label, and like we just lose that identification to labels, I guess.
And that's actually a really good thing. Like and I have a lot of friends that are, like we're all like political friends, and like, what happened to you? I'm like, I'm not going to subscribe to that anymore. It doesn't serve me. And so how can I heal the world from this place, not from right or left or whatever? Like it doesn't need any of that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think it's a journey to get to a place where you understand the non-duality, the 5D thing, but you still take sides. You can still, it's not about not taking sides, but it's about just seeing the bigger picture, right?
Yeah. Well, and I like to be from a place where I'm like, I have stances, I have things that I believe in, I've got convictions, but to take anything as black and white is not the bigger picture. And I think that our system, the matrix, is designed for that little this. And I can be on my side of my convictions, and I feel very strongly about things without participating in the divide and conquer part of it. So yeah. So that was a long-winded answer. Continue.
Next one is, let's suppose that we sign a contract before coming to this life. And then just before we come here, we choose what we came here to learn as well as to teach. What do you think this would be for you in this lifetime?
I totally think that's exactly what happened. So I think I feel like maybe conceited saying that, but I feel like I'm currently doing it. Like, I feel like I finally figured it out. And like all the trauma that I've been through was not by accident, or I think that my mom and I signed that before we got here. And now I get to help people heal that. And so I think it's really, I think that assuming that that's what happened, I'm here to help people heal the falsities and the non-truths and all the things that take us away from love.
Yeah. Self-love.
And self-love is every love. You can't, when you love yourself, other people love you differently. You teach other people how to love you. And so if you don't love yourself, people will treat you the exact same way. Yeah.
And it's so important. Now is the time.
That's right. Like right now is a really big time for this. That's why I thank everybody that comes to their mat. I'm like, thank you for doing that for yourself, because the world needs it.
Yeah.
We all need this right now. It's really important.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So last question is actually not I did come up with this question. I got from Lewis Howes' podcast. And it's called 3 Truths. So imagine that many years from now, when you're about to make the transition from this physical world into the spiritual realm, all of the work that you've done, everything has been deleted. You only have a piece of paper in your hands with a pen, and you can write 3 truths, and this is going to be your message to the world. What would be your 3 truths?
That's huge. That's like on the spot. Love is everything. Can I have one truth? Because I feel like that's like all the truth.
It kind of encompasses everything.
Kind of encompasses all of it. Love is everything. And I don't know, things are not as they seem. Because that's a big thing that I've been working with lately, is just that the veil is so thick. And I think if we knew that that wasn't real, we would see, it would be so much easier for us to love each other. And so that's like, maybe to make it dramatic, it's all not real, honestly. And healing is important. I don't know. Just love is everything. It's just like, that was a hard one. I was like, oh, I got this. I'm getting all of them. Nope.
No, but that's it. And it's simpler than we think, right?
Yeah.
Because
we make it complicated.
Yeah, like this whole life is just, it's a blink, right? When you're looking from the higher perspective, it's love.
I like to think of it as a game. I like that's how life feels easier if I'm just like, it's like a game, and I'm just kind of on here like a little board game piece, just running around, checking things out. It's not a big deal.
Yeah.
When we look at it like a big deal, it's so much harder.
Yeah. And just keep reminding ourselves, right, that there's more than meets the eye, like you said, and that love is all there is.
Yeah.
So with that, I just want to say thank you so much for being here, for showing up as your most beautiful, authentic self. I want to acknowledge you for your courage to love yourself and to inspire other people to do the same. And just thank you for shining your light.
Thank you for having me. And you're so bright. I adore you, and I share you with everybody because you're just such a bright light in this world, and we need you. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. And we'll talk soon on Instagram.
Hey, okay, I'll see you on Instagram.
Much love. Thanks for listening to this episode. If you would like to learn more about Jen's work, visit her website, www.selfloveyogi.com, and follow her on Instagram at theselflove.yogi. As usual, you can find links on the show's notes. And once again, if this has brought you value, please subscribe to my podcast and take a screenshot of it, share it to your Instagram stories, and be sure to tag me and Jen so that we know that it's brought you value. And your friends might benefit from this too. As always, keep shining your light, keep your heart open, and let love lead the way. I love you. See you in the next episode.